Hey everyone, today I'm going to be reviewing the book A Soul Remembers Hiroshima. I know this is backwards, I might change it for you. By Dolores Cannon. A Soul Remembers Hiroshima. And of course she's referring to the atomic bomb being dropped on Hiroshima, I believe in 1945. I wanted to read this book to get some perspective from, I guess, a soul who lived in the war. And I was really looking forward to the space in between lives where the processing and the healing of the soul happens. And there's often like deep wisdom that comes from that place. Spoiler alert, that actually doesn't happen in this book. It's one of the things that I love about the work of quantum healing in the kind of training by Dolores Cannon, is that in our sessions that last about 2 hours, we always try to access the inner voice or subconscious or higher guidance of the person to be able to give some deep perspective on the lifetime or experience that they witnessed. And I was looking for this in this book, especially considering what's going on in the world right now. It is October 2023, and the area of Palestine, Israel, Gaza is kind of ramping up its violence and becoming very, very tumultuous. And in my seeking to understand the violence that is happening and why it has to happen right now, I thought I would read this book. I do know that Dolores has also accessed lifetimes of people who experienced the Holocaust, and I'm searching for where those books are. I thought that there was a book specifically on that topic, but there isn't. And anyway, I'll dive into more about the book. It's a short read. Not sure how many pages. Oh, there's 261 pages in the Kobo reader. That's how I read it. And the pages have this many words on it. Let's see. The beginning quote is, "I am become death, the shatterer of worlds." Bhagavad Gita. It's a quote by the Bhagavad Gita. Quoted by J. Robert Oppenheimer while recalling the first atomic bomb blast near Alamogordo, NM, New Mexico, July 16, 1945. So I guess that's when they first tested it out before sending it out. It's heavy stuff. It's dark stuff. It's seeing what violence humanity is capable of. And I actually love reading these historical past life regression type books because it gives us a view into history, like a first person view that we almost never get, unless we have letters or written accounts that people have written down in certain stages in history that have not been meddled with. We don't get much firsthand account of different periods in history. And oftentimes those are written by like a certain class of people, right, who have the education and the means to write these things down. And through past life regression, we're able to get historical information, firsthand account of really any point in history, just whatever comes up, whatever that soul is connecting to, whatever is important to that person. And so this is the story of a young 22-year-old woman who came to Dolores initially just out of curiosity about what she would see in her past lives. Now, of course, I guess some people might not understand the deep spiritual work that is past life regression, quantum healing, in the way it depends how it's done. Of course, you can go see a past life regressionist that it's just more of like a curiosity thing, or a kind of like lighter level healing integration type thing. And I think it depends on where every practitioner is at. Where I'm at with my work now is incorporating aspects of conscious leadership and sovereignty and kind of responsibility, and coming off of the victim, hero, villain drama triangle into kind of higher states of human living through this work. And so I'm looking for the deep. I'm interested in the deep. I'm interested in the deep transformation. And one thing that Dolores mentions early on in the book is that the first lifetime that this young woman accessed was of a woman living in Colorado who didn't have much education. It was at the time of the settlers, like I think it was late 1800s. So it wasn't early settlers. It was just after the big gold rush, and it was in the time when Colorado was becoming a state, I guess. They were deciding to switch from a territory to a state. And this woman, didn't have much education, but was describing from her perspective what was happening. And I love Dolores's approach for writing these books because, so the book was written in 1980 something, I think 83. So she had been doing her work already for about 20 years. So it's interesting that as she's writing, she's recalling certain aspects of history, and it's like a historical, information book. But as we're reading it, because we're now, oh my God, like 40 years out from the publishing of the book, it's like we're getting a piece of history from 40 years ago as well. And at the time that she was putting out these books, you can imagine that the amount of people who were interested in this was not very much. And even the idea of past lives was like hush hush. Dolores herself was brought up Christian in some way, and so it was really big for her to be talking about this. And I think, she was not nervous or scared, but more walking carefully and intentionally in the midst of the conservative climate, I suppose, that she had been brought up in and was still living in some sense. And she's also American, so she tells her perspective on what she grew up hearing about and learning about regarding the Second World War and the dropping of the atomic bombs in Japan. But I will get to that later. So it starts off with a 22-year-old girl who's coming just out of curiosity, and she accesses this life in Colorado, and Dolores does further research afterwards that, really put the two pieces together. The town where this girl was living no longer exists, but there are names that are still there. And there were things that she mentioned also that correspond with that time in history. This woman was curious to come for more sessions, and she was a somnambulist, which means that when she regresses, she goes really deep and takes on the full personality of the person, and can see and witness like incredible detail. I actually recently had someone like this. Dolores says it's about 1 in 100 people that are this way. And I recently did find someone who was like this, who regressed to the life of a Native American, and the details that she was putting out were incredible. And also the change in personality. Oh, she regressed to a Native American man who was a bear hunter and was very, like, a very simple person, very kind of practical and straight. And it was incredible to see how the personality of that man really came out in this woman who was just on the table, undergoing the regression. And so this woman in the book by Dolores is a somnambulist, and Dolores talks about how sometimes the subconscious is like testing the practitioner or testing her and seeing if it can trust her. And so I think it took them 4 or 5 sessions before they found the life of Nigorigatu, the Japanese man who lived in Japan and died at the atomic bomb. And so I find this fascinating because I usually only see people once, and I have some friends I have practiced on more 2-3 times, but not someone I have seen weekly or bi-weekly or monthly to see how far we can go. I have a friend right now who's also a QHHT practitioner, and we've exchanged sessions, and we plan to do more. And I'm very curious with her if we can get like 5 or 6 sessions in, maybe do them monthly, how deep each of us can go into our experiences. And so this woman initially came, she was saying, just out of curiosity, but Dolores could kind of feel that there was something more. And eventually, after building more trust, she said that she had this incredible experience where she was doing something in the house and just had the TV on, and the TV was showing a documentary about the survivors of the Hiroshima nuclear bomb, and that she had this like insane kind of panic attack emotion come over her that just didn't make any sense. She hadn't really thought much about that event in history prior to that day, and it hit her with such an emotional weight that she was in like a serious depressive state for about 2 weeks afterwards. And she hadn't spoken about it to anybody, not even her parents. She had come from a very conservative Christian religion upbringing, and so it just seemed so foreign to her, and she had no idea who to even open up and talk to about it, how anyone would be able to help her. And so Dolores had a feeling that maybe she had a past life that was connected to that, but it was obvious of a very emotionally traumatic experience. And so it took about 4 or 5 sessions to be able to go and find that personality. And in that time, she found, I think, 2 or 3 other lifetimes that were simple. But I love the way that Dolores writes, because one of the lifetimes was of a boy who was an orphan and just living in the woods and fending for himself in like early medieval times, like maybe year 1000 or something like that. And he described, I found this really interesting, an interesting piece of history, that there was like a procession of people. There were like knights on horses, and there was this, fancy woman that was peeking out of her litter. He called it some kind of a litter. And Dolores was a bit confused as to what this was. And she said, "Can you describe this more for me?" And he said that it's a woman. The woman was sitting in like a box, and the box had long kind of big rods or sticks coming out of it, and those were being carried by horses. And so there was a horse in the front and a horse in the back, and there were no wheels on this carriage because they didn't have good enough roads. This was in Great Britain, and they didn't have good enough roads in that location. And so there were no wheels on this thing. It was just a litter being carried by the horses. And Dolores had never heard of something like that. And she went to look it up afterwards. And she said that that's actually how people were carried around for a long while, even into the 1700s. And that the movies that we see nowadays don't portray that, because it's really hard to train horses, especially the one in the back, to walk forward when it can't see in front of itself. So the litter is in front, there's one horse in front, one horse behind, the horse in the back can't see in front. And now for movies, they don't make the horses do that because it's really hard to train them to do that. And so it's interesting because this woman didn't know about this otherwise. Dolores didn't know about it, and they got to prove it afterwards. And I've actually seen that in my own sessions for myself and with my clients, that they have seen accessed information or a certain scene or experience or story that was later confirmed to be true, that they didn't have in their conscious mind prior to that experience. So that was interesting. And then that woman also accessed the lifetime of a young boy who was living in South America, likely, and trying to live somewhere safe in the jungle away from the white colonialists who were coming in because they were kidnapping the people to work in the mines. It's a lot of harsh stuff, right? Humanity has been very violent and horrible to each other. And I'm going to talk a bit more about how I process and sit with that and hold all of that. That's part of kind of my individual work, and part of my work as a practitioner is to hold these stories for people to be able to access them. And so after all of those experiences, we get to the Japanese man, and Dolores is so beautiful in the way that she explores this and knows that she needs to kind of get his trust and build trust with the subconscious to be able to actually go to that final scene. The young woman also said that she wasn't ready to go there, but she was willing to kind of start seeing the lifetime of that man in Japan. And he had a very simple life, beautiful life, a very kind of like kind person who tended to himself, tended to his rice fields. He was a potter. He talks about his early upbringing. And then one thing that I found stood out for me was at the wedding, he talked about the uniform that he was wearing, the kimono, and the way that it was tied, that they have special knots for different celebrations with the belts that they use. And so it was tied in a special way, and his wife's knot was tied in a special way, the woman that he was marrying. And Dolores connected with, because of course there was no real developed internet at the time in the 80s. So she connected with a friend of a friend who had lived in Japan and was kind of like a specialist about Japanese history, and asked her about these knots and the way they were tied and some of the other traditions that were described in the wedding. And this woman confirmed everything, that's how it was. There was something very interesting, something about drinking sake 3 times, that is like what confirms, like 3 shots of sake, that's what confirms the wedding, consummates the wedding basically in their tradition. And I found that very interesting, and she confirmed that that's true about Japan still today. So you can see that it's just wild what people can access through this type of meditation. And so he had a very simple life, and then kind of things started ramping up with the war. From his perspective, he was just trying to live his life and not pay too much attention into it. He didn't know too much about what was going on, wasn't upset about it, just wanted to live his life, until the army started taking over people's farm fields and foods and food stores and jewelry, because they were just kind of collapsing in Japan. He was saying that the soldiers were even destroying their fields, which didn't seem to have much forethought into the fact that they would need a lot of food, to feed the people and the army. And yeah, it's a really kind of beautiful and intense first person account as to what the Japanese were living, what their living situation was. And Dolores, from her perspective, talks about, as an American and a young girl, she was actually already born when that bomb was dropped. the story told to the Americans was always that the Japanese are monsters and they're terrible people and they did this thing to us in Pearl Harbor. We need to get back at them, and we're at war, so they're the enemy. And so from her perspective, she didn't. It was like a transformation for her to see how human all those people were living in Japan at the time. And also the fact that the country was crumbling from the inside and there was no need to do, such a drastic thing to the people, because it just decimated like miles and miles and miles of city. And then there was, nuclear poisoning that the people suffered from and still transmit down to subsequent generations. And it's really, it was really big to see what humans can do to each other. I believe that it's a really cool way to study history, because, a lot of the written things that we have in textbooks or even documentaries that we see on TV, even YouTube, a lot of it is filtered through a certain perspective, a certain political agenda still, as to an image that we want to maintain of, especially usually as the victors, the one who gets to tell the story. And I think that in my homeschooling, these historical accounts are going to be a way that we kind of study history and get to know things a bit better, and also get a deep perspective about. In other books that I've read by Dolores, she's able to go to like the life between lives and to talk to the soul on the other side to get like a greater perspective. It feels a lot, more divine. You get to understand the karma of things a little bit better. For example, I saw the life of a woman with a woman that I was regressing, who was murdered, had her throat cut by colonialists in America. And I had like so much I had a strong emotional reaction to that. I think I have seen a past life for myself as a Native American medicine woman, and I think that aspect of me just was so torn. And I even asked her when she was in the state of the higher self, I said, like, Emily feels very emotional about this. In my mind, I was even thinking, like, I'm going to be dealing with this for days. I'm traumatized of this thought. When I'm regressing with someone, I'm kind of really in the scene with them. I try to imagine it in my mind, and that's why I'm like with them there and supporting them through whatever they're seeing. And so I had this strong visual in my mind of what happened to her. It really came out of nowhere. She was just in a field with her children. And the client said in that state of higher self that there was that she was paying off a lot of karma with that death for things that like she had done in the past to others in other lifetimes, that the soul was learning and growing, and that that man carried, a lot of negative karma with him in that lifetime and to other lifetimes for having done that act in the way that he did. And so, in a sense that nothing ever is left unbalanced or unchecked. Through this work, I get to see that although humans can be very violent and, horrible to each other, God or creator or creatrix, divine mother, father, that's holding all of it, witnessing all of it, giving us the free will to go through it all so that we can learn. Just like children, going to school and committing their mistakes, or going off, teenagers going off into the world and having to have their free will so that they can learn and grow and take true responsibility for themselves. I believe Divine Father, Mother, Creator is a loving presence holding us all through that, and that there are natural laws built into this matrix of existence, built into our dimension, that always bring a balance, and that the law of karma is loving. And so yeah, it's just that God's love is present through everything. And so this was kind of what I was looking to get from the book. And that perspective that Dolores can so beautifully write about, that she writes about in her other books. And I feel a little bit disappointed that it wasn't really found at the end of this book. She kind of talks about her perspective on the history and whether or not, you know, that bomb had to be dropped. She gives different points of views that the politicians and American government were giving out at the time. My grandparents were, you know, children of war, and my grandfather talks about the firebombing of Dresden, which was done by the Allies to Germany. Basically, the war was pretty much over against the Nazis, and Dresden was a city in East Germany that was mostly occupied by civilians, and they sent firebombers and that was kind of a thing in World War II, where they would just send firebombs that would just put a whole fire throughout the whole city. And he was in that fire, you know, he almost died in that fire. And it's just like little things like that that are an extra act that are not really necessary in order to win the war, but I guess the leaders think that they're used to prove a point of power and to like scare people off so that it never happens again. That was kind of one of the points of that dropping the atomic bomb, was for Americans to show their power, to show the power of nuclear power, and to kind of frighten off any other enemy for like many, many years to come. And, you know, in some way, perhaps it has done that, where there's like such a fear of a nuclear war that we have to find other means to like not allow that to happen, which is like with the Cold War. I'm interested in learning a little bit more about that history. One thing that Dolores said in another book later that I think that she learned through one of her sessions was that the energetics of nuclear science, you know, now carries a really serious karma because of the bombs that were dropped in Japan. And that what was said in that book was that like humans cannot recover from that. And I'd love to find where it is in which book, but that also it's in her work with extraterrestrials, that the guardians of Earth and sort of the good extraterrestrials interfered and stopped humans from using nuclear weapons in that way again on Earth, because we could literally obliterate the planet with that technology that was meant for humans to discover and use, but not in that way. And so it now carries that negative karma. I'll try to find where I read that. I'll ask my man, my partner, he will know. So that's my little tidbit and feels about the book. I hope you enjoy. If you want me to read and review other of Dolores Cannon's books, please let me know which ones, and I will get them up here for you. In the meantime, have a most beautiful day. For me, holding and seeing and witnessing the violence that humans can inflict on each other is a constant reminder to purge any, you know, lingering violence or anger that I have within myself from myself, and to teach my children to also do that. That's the first step I can do, and then bring that to any human that I work with, because I believe that humans can be so much more and that we can overcome these aspects of ourselves. Yeah. Have a beautiful day.